Hey everyone, today we're going to look at Lesson 2. It's from your Module B, Unit 1 book. It's about cell structures and function. And we're working on page 19, so we're starting on page 19 here today. And so if you look at the picture of a cell here, and you look at the picture of this football stadium, I think that's the Rose Bowl in California. But if you look at those two, we could make some comparisons between those. We could make a model of the cell, in other words. So we could compare this stadium, the different parts of this stadium, to the different parts and organelles of a cell. And so, if we look at this, if we ever think about a stadium as a complete system, what parts of the system provide the functions it needs? And so, material moves in and out of the system through the doors. So like in a sports stadium, materials move in and out of the stadium that's needed. Materials such as waste move out of the doors. Materials such as maybe like food and drinks for the concession stands, the equipment for the players and such move into the stadium. And so what are some of the functions that a cell and a sports stadium have in common? Well, both the cell and the sports stadium, they have different parts that keep the systems intact. They allow the materials to move in and out of the system. So for a cell has a cell membrane around the outside, and that allows materials to come in and waste to go out of the cell. Just sort of like the stadium, the walls on the outside has the doors that allow materials to come in and waste to come out. So there are some similarities and differences, and we're going to be working on this over the next couple weeks about a model of a cell and comparing that to some other structures and systems that we maybe are more common, more familiar with. So if we compare some cell structures, we compare a cell as a living system. So a cell is made up of many different organelles, many different interacting parts. But regardless of the shape or the structure, there are some similarities and differences between cells. So if we look at the picture of these two cells here, so these two different cell types, we have a plant cell here on the left, we have a plant cell, and we have a protozoan on the right. And so we showed a picture of a protozoa cell to you last week in class. Remember, a protozoa has these little cilia, these little hair-like structures on the outside that allow it to move. It lives in the water. This is just a single-celled organism right here. This plant cell is part of a multicellular organism. But if we look at both of these cells have cell membranes and a nucleus. And so there's a cell membrane around the outside of these cells. The protozoan here, that does not have a cell wall like the plant cell does. So this kind of bluish colored line here is the cell wall of the plant, but a protozoa doesn't have that. So the plant cells have a cell wall, and they also have chloroplasts inside there, but a protozoan does not. The cell wall provides some structure and support, as well as some protection for that plant cell. And then the chloroplasts inside the plant are for gathering light energy, making sugars for the plant. The protozoan, it has to get its energy and food elsewhere, so it cannot make its own food. So it basically has to engulf its food. So it actually takes food from the outside and brings it to the inside of the cell. So there's different types of cells and their structures. Okay, but all cells have certain structures. So all cells have a cell membrane. All cells have cytoplasm. And all cells have genetic material. And you may want to highlight where it says, or underline where it says cytoplasm and the genetic material. Many cells also contain organelles. So other eukaryotic cells especially, and we're going to talk about eukaryotic cells here in a second, but eukaryotic cells have many organelles. You might have some prokaryotic cells that have a few organelles, but generally they don't have as many as the eukaryotic cells. Okay, so let's start with prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, what prokaryotic cells mean is it does not have a nucleus. And you think pro rhymes with no. So pro, no nucleus in a prokaryotic cell. That's really the big difference here. It may have some organelles, but it does not have a nucleus. So the genetic material is found in the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. But in prokaryotic cells, since they don't have a nucleus, it just kind of floats in the middle. Now this picture of a prokaryotic cell here, a prokaryotic cell does not always have to have all of these structures. Okay, and it usually does not have all of these structures. So sometimes you'll have a prokaryotic cell that may have cilia, these little structures, these kind of black lines, hairs coming off of it. Or it may have flagellum that come off the back of the cell, kind of longer ones, kind of act as a propeller for the cell. So It may have one of those. It usually does not have both of those. Okay, or it might not have any at all. So bacteria, for example, many bacteria don't have any of those on there. It's just the main body of the cell here. It kind of looks like a pill or something like that. And there's different types of bacteria that have different shapes. But all cells have a cell membrane that surrounds the cell. They have cytoplasm inside of that cell membrane, and they have some sort of genetic material. They may have some extra organelles and structures, but not always. Some bacteria may have a cell wall, some bacteria may not. So if we look at the bottom question here, which structure controls what goes in and out of the cell? And we want to explain our reasoning. Well, if we look at our definitions here, over here on the side, we look at our definitions. Cell membrane. So the cell membrane surrounds and protects the cell and controls what materials go into and out of the cell. So what controls what goes in and out of the cell? That's our cell membrane. Nutrients must go in and waste must go out of the cell. If we look at eukaryotic cells, so eukaryotic cells, the big thing with eukaryotic cells is they have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. They also have many other organelles. They might have many other organelles like mitochondria, chloroplast, cell wall, and they have lots of organelles. And so we can look. So this is a eukaryotic cell. This would be an animal cell. So they have lots of these organelles in here, and each one of those organelles has a different function, kind of like organs in your body. So your heart has a particular function, your lungs have a function, your stomach, intestines, liver, kidneys, they all have particular functions that they serve, and they help the whole organism survive. Just like each one of these organelles has a particular function that they serve, and they help the cell as a whole survive. And so we can look at those different structures and the functions and why they're there here in our definitions. Okay, but if we compare our plant cell, or our animal cell here, to a plant cell, we can see that there's many structures that are the same. So many structures are the same, but the plant cell does have a few extra structures that the animal cell doesn't. Mainly, you have a cell wall. Animals do not have a cell wall. Okay, plants need that cell wall for structure, support, protection. While animal cells, they have other means for structure and support. For like humans, mammals, they have bones. Bones help with our support. Structures, they don't need these cell walls. Insects have an exoskeleton that helps with their support, so they don't need these cell walls. But there's a few other things that plant cells have that animal cells don't. One would be the chloroplasts here. Chloroplasts are for the gathering of light energy. And then plant cells have what's called a central vacuole, usually a large vacuole in the middle. It's mainly for storing water. They need that water for photosynthesis to happen. So plant cells have a few extra organelles that animal cells do not. But in a lot of cases, they're still the same. But if you look, the main differences between eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells, plant eukaryotic cells, they have a nucleus. Animal cells, they also have a nucleus. But if we go back and look at our prokaryotic cells, things like bacteria, they do not have a nucleus. Pro rhymes with no, so no nucleus here. Okay, the genetic material, DNA, is just floating in the cytoplasm usually. So if we were to read these observations down here about a cell, and we were to then try to determine whether it's a plant cell, an animal cell, or a prokaryotic cell. If we look that a cell has a membrane and ribosomes, well, if we look at our pictures, all of these cells have a cell membrane. They all have cell membranes and ribosomes. An animal cell has a cell membrane, and it also has ribosomes. If we look at our prokaryotic cell, it has a cell membrane, and it has ribosomes. And so, in this case, all three of those cells, plant, animal, and prokaryotic cells, protists, all three of them have a cell membrane and ribosomes. So there's not enough information to tell what type of cell it is. But if a cell has many chloroplasts, usually that's going to be a plant cell. There are some examples, some single-celled organisms that also have chloroplasts, but generally speaking, if it has a chloroplast, it's going to be a plant cell. If the cell has a cell membrane and mitochondria but no cell wall, that's an animal cell. So if we look here at our animal cell, it has a cell membrane, it has mitochondria, but it doesn't have a cell wall. That's a plant. That's an animal cell. And if it has a nucleus, well, if we look here at the plant cell, it has a nucleus right here. The animal cell also has a nucleus right here. And so if we look at that, there's not enough information to tell whether it's a plant cell or an animal cell. And there's other cells, single-celled organisms, that also have a nucleus. Things like an amoeba, it has a nucleus as well. So if you look, the cell has a nucleus and a cell wall. Well, for the most part, that's going to be a plant cell because we have a cell wall and we have a nucleus. And so that's going to be a plant cell there. So we can tell the difference between that. So if we identify a few different differences and some similarities between cells, if we look at things like bacterial cells. And so if you look at this picture of bacteria, this is a prokaryotic cell, and this is the one I was talking about. It kind of looks like a pill. It doesn't really have any cilia, flagella on the outside. It's just that structure right there. So that's a picture of bacterial cells. And so bacterial cells, they have a cell membrane. They can have a cell wall. They don't always have a cell wall, but they can have a cell wall. But that's all they would have. So they do not have chloroplasts. They do not have mitochondria. They do not have a nucleus. If we look at an animal cell, so a fish embryo, so this is a cell from a fish. They have a cell membrane. They have mitochondria, and they have a nucleus. Now we can't really identify the mitochondria in this picture, but it's an animal cell, so we know there's mitochondria there. Okay, this darker purple right here, that would be the nucleus, and then this kind of lighter purple line that goes around the outside, that's our cell membrane. If we look at a plant cell, these are moss leaf cells. We can see they kind of look like bricks almost around the outside. What we see right there, that is the cell wall. Just inside of the cell wall would be the cell membrane. We can't really identify the difference between the cell wall and cell membrane. Can't really see the cell membrane there, but it is there. We know it is there. These little green circles there, those are chloroplasts. So we can see all the chloroplasts that are in those moss leaf cells. We can't really identify the mitochondria, but we know it's a plant cell. We know it has to have mitochondria. So there are mitochondria in that plant cell. We just can't identify them right now. And it has a nucleus as well. And a few of these cells you can kind of see the nucleus. I mean, here we have a little bit of the nucleus we can kind of identify right there. But you can't see it in every one of those cells, but the nucleus is there. And so, how do the moss leaf cells and the fish cells differ, and how are they the same? Well, the moss are plants, and the fish are animals. So they're both eukaryotic cells, so they both have a nucleus, they both have a cell membrane, they both have other organelles, many of the same organelles, but the moss leaf, they're going to have chloroplasts, they're going to have cell walls, in addition to when they both have the nucleus, mitochondria, and cell membrane. So the plant cells have a few extra organelles compared to the animal cells in this case. Alright guys, that's the end of the Exploration 1. So you'll watch the Exploration 2 next.